get started, we may have a couple of people that will be coming in a little later, but we do need to be on time. First of all, let me welcome all the committee members. Thank you for being here. We have a number of guests that will serve on a couple of panels in just a few minutes. We appreciate you being here, as well as anyone that is just interested in what's going on and wants to be a part of the know or part of the process. We welcome you. Okay. We do have a few members that were not here at the first meeting. If you don't mind, let me ask you to introduce yourself. I think everybody here, we'll start with you.
Well, thanks. Pleasure being here. Representative Ed Setzer, I serve Northwest County, House District 35 in the State House. I've had the honor to serve on the House Education Committee for 13 sessions, have some faces I recognize, and I feel very strongly about leadership is the X factor in education. I'm very, very pleased to be part of this. Senator Tippins is a senator, so many things we're like-minded on, other things we take offline, but he's been a great leader for our community, and I think it's exciting to see him step out and with you help lead this effort for our state. So I'm going to listen and hopefully provide some thoughtful feedback, maybe challenge us to make this committee to be the most it can be. So I'm honored to be part of it.
Thank you. I believe everybody else was here. No, that's right. Senator Sims, Powell Sims.
Good morning.
Press the button.
Press the button. Good morning. State Senator Freddie Powell Sims from Southwest Georgia. I represent 11 counties, most of them extremely rural. I am a former middle school principal, so education is extremely important to me, and very, very passionate about getting the right leaders to come into our areas to work. So thank you guys so very much for consenting to do this. Thank you.
David, you were here the last meeting, but you're filling in for Superintendent Schofield this morning, right?
Yes, sir. Good morning. My name is David Judy, and I work in the Hawk County School District, and I'm actually filling in for Mr. Schofield, and I am in charge of our leadership development program. I've worked closely with Gwinnett, Forsyth, Cobb County, and different leadership programs around the state to plan it. We're in our third year of the program. Really excited about what it's doing for our leaders.
Many of you were here at the last meeting, and I believe you're filling in for the Chancellor today.
Yes, sir. Good morning. I'm Roland Downs with the University System. I lead our government affairs function for the university system, and I'm pinch hitting this morning for Chancellor Wrigley and Bob Michaels at the last meeting as well. So thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I believe that gets everyone. Before we get in, I'm sorry, Glenn, I see you so often I forgot that. Dr. Cannon.
Good morning, I'm Glenn Cannon. I'm the president of Gwinnett Technical College, but I'm on the committee representing the Technical College System in Georgia and our great Commissioner, Gretchen Coleman.
Okay. Very good. If you had not said anything, I had you marked president. But
You got credit for 2 meetings with the commissioner. My fault.
Okay, before I get into the agenda, I would just like for us to maybe take a moment to pause. There's a lot of things going on in our nation. I understand the incident that occurred in Las Vegas, the horrific incident last evening. Someone told me that I heard it was 20 people. I heard it was like 50, is that right? And maybe 200 injured, and there's been 3 or 4 other places around the world. I think Edmonton, Canada, and some other places. Plus, we still have the remnants of the hurricane in Houston, Florida, and Puerto Rico, and we could just take a moment of silent meditation to remember those people and be thankful for what we have. Thank you. Okay, let me review the agenda with you today. We're going to swap agenda item 4 and 5. We're going to have panel 2 first, and then we'll go back to panel 1. Then after our panels, we'll probably take a short break after each panel. But as we move into the item number 6, the planned leadership programs in Georgia, this is going to be a survey that we will send out to the superintendents, and I will review that with you. We have the survey, but we have not sent it out, and I will review it with you and see if you have any comments on it. And if you, thank you. If you don't, then that's fine, but we will need to send this out fairly quickly here in order to give them a little time to get it back to us for the next meeting. And then item number 7, we want to review some of the research that primarily research what does parent want in their school, from their school, what do they want to see in a leader? And we have a summation of research for that. You all may recall that last meeting, Representative Stovall asked if maybe we could do that, and we felt like there had already been a number of surveys done. So we'll just bring you the results of those. And hopefully that will give us a lot of good information about what parents expect. And then we do have another research item on leadership programs, item 8, the Council of Chief State School Officers report. And then we'll do a comparison of some of the current efforts with some of the existing needs that have been compiled to us by Judy and Dr. Gilly. And then the Georgia Education Leadership Academy, we're going to give you a proposed model, what a model could look like. It doesn't mean that that's what it's going to be, but it just gives you an idea of what a proposal is, and maybe we can work from that to really look at where do we really want to focus. Item number 9 is obviously we need time for your comments and your questions by you or panel members. And then we will hopefully be able to end the meeting. I don't see a time on here, but we plan on being done by 2 o'clock, if not earlier. So that should get us all out. Before we begin in the agenda, does anybody have a question or comment? Okay. Well, very good. We'll move right into the agenda. I've asked Dr. Glenn Bethel if he would to moderate our panel. Remember, we're in the, let's refer to it as the exploratory stage at this moment. Really, what's going on? What are the audience that get served? What's the purpose of some of the existing academies? So we have 2 panels today that will help us in that task, and I believe, Dr. Bethel, we're ready to move, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman Will Banks, for, again, it's a pleasure to be here with the distinguished membership of this Joint Study Committee and delegates for members of the Joint Study Committee. At this time, I'm going to ask, I see a couple of our superintendents, Dr. Steve Barker. Steve, if you would join us up front. Dr. Yolanda Turner. Yolanda, if you would join us up front. Dr. Chris McMichael from Barrow County Schools was scheduled to be with us this morning, but had indicated he would send his associate superintendent, Dr. Angela Moton, but I do not see Angela in the audience. So, you know, sometimes smaller is better. So we're going to, this way we'll have a great opportunity to hear from two current superintendents who come from different parts of the state of Georgia. And we want this, again, not to be a presentation, but to be a discussion about what these superintendents see as their needs and how those needs may be addressed, or perhaps if there are gaps that exist, that we have an opportunity to hear from two practitioners who, like all of us in this room, are very, very interested in the future, interested certainly in the present, and the capacity of our leaders across the state of Georgia. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Yolanda Turner, who's superintendent in Calhoun County Schools. And Dr. Turner and I have had the great pleasure of working with each other now for the past many months. And I personally had the opportunity to learn a lot about what her needs are in Calhoun County. Dr. Steve Barker, superintendent of Coweta County Schools. And Dr. Barker, we appreciate you being here this morning. And for both of you, we know how busy superintendents are. So, Dr. Barker, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your district, where you're located, but specifically tell us about the number of principals and the number of assistant principals in your district.
Just on?
Yes, sir. I feel pressed the button. You should be good.
There we go. Well, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I hope that something I have to say to be a benefit to you as you accept this challenge. I will say at the beginning, I'm glad to see the effort by this committee. I think there's some alignment and coordination of this effort statewide will do us all a lot of good. Coweta County is just south of the airport there in Newnan, Georgia, about 20 minutes south of the airport. We have approximately 22,700 students. We have 31 schools. Each school has a building level principal. And our middle schools operate with 2 assistant principals. Our high schools operate with 6 or 7. We have 3 large high schools. Our elementary schools typically operate with 1 assistant principal or 1.5. Our leadership model includes what I would consider to be a standard protocol of leadership teams at the school level, both school improvement teams as well as overall leadership teams. We have a district leadership team that funnels that work. I like to say it funnels it up rather than down in our system.
Dr. Turner, describe where you are in the state of Georgia. Perhaps not everyone knows where Calhoun County is. So tell us where you're located, where you work. It's already gone.
I believe there's a map in everybody's folder in case somebody don't remember your civics about where Calhoun County is.
Testing, can you hear me? Okay. Good morning. Good morning again.
It's a good thing when people share. So we're sharing.
Yes. Good morning again. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. Gladly accept and be able to share some insight with you. Calhoun County School System is located in Morgan, Georgia. It is the county seat, which is 30 miles outside of Albany, Georgia. Most people can pinpoint where we are once I say Albany, Georgia. We have 3 schools. Total enrollment for the system is about 615 students. We have 3 principals and 1 assistant principal. So quite different setup from what Dr. Barker has described for his system, but yet the needs are just as great and are no different just because of the size of the system.
So, Dr. Turner, let me build on that comment. So, you said you've got 3 principals, 3 schools, 1 assistant principal. So, perhaps for the critic who might say, why worry? You've only got 3 administrators, so why would a superintendent need to worry about leadership? What's your response?
Well, my response is that regardless of the size, I think that's just a given, a fact that's there. The needs are still the same. We still serve students, whether we serve 50 or 50,000. We are still responsible and held accountable for raising student achievement in our district. So every student is important, and that leadership is the key to making sure that we provide an environment for continuous learning for teachers. We provide the appropriate principal preparation for principals so that they're effective in their primary focus of raising student achievement.
So there's some obvious differences between a rural southwest Georgia school district and a school district like yours, Dr. Barker, as you said, just south of the airport, south of Atlanta. Want to hear from Dr. Barker, how are you meeting the needs of your leaders? And talk about, do you know where your future leaders are coming from? Do you know when they will arrive? How do you prepare them to better serve the needs of your district and the kids of Coweta County?
Well, I think for us, as far as preparing our leaders, a lot of our principals are hired from the assistant principal ranks. I think in larger districts that's often the case. Doesn't mean that we do not hire principals from elsewhere. We have, and they've been successful. But typically for us, we will have a large pool of assistant principals that you begin to see their work and you begin to identify their strengths. So I think when we talk about leadership preparation, one of the areas that I'm very interested in, and I think can make a big difference for us, is taking assistant principals who have promise and giving them a high quality coaching experience with their building level principal. Unfortunately, all principals, many of which are very, very good building level principals, are not skilled at coaching an assistant principal alone. It's one thing to delegate responsibility to them. It's one thing to let them ride along and be successful. It's another to help them grow professionally over a 3 or 4 year period. So we have begun really trying to discuss how can we establish protocols that help those principals bring those assistant principals along. We do a similar thing with our teacher leaders who aspire to be administrators in the future. We have a leadership academy that runs on a cycle every couple of years, and that exposes them to both education and research-based best practices, but it also exposes them to kind of how we conduct business in Coweta County, so that as they look at their opportunity and leadership down the road, they're more prepared. So I think for us, those 2 areas allow us to, when you ask me where do I see my future leaders, in the last 3 years, we've hired a good number of new principals. And so our bench is not as deep as it has been in the past. So we will be restarting some of those Leadership Academy efforts in order to build our bench. But that's an advantage that Metro system has that smaller districts don't.
I agree. So what you've described is what I think many of us would often refer to as a grow your own program. As you described, you've got this teacher leader academy, and you just said, I'm now realizing it may be time to redouble or start up some additional efforts on that front. So growing your own perhaps is easier in a district of your size where you've got a number of teachers and you're helping them develop a number of APs. Dr. Turner, your situation, I would venture, is very different from that. So where do you find your leaders? Tell us a little bit more in detail about those principles that you have.
Well, it's very difficult. We find ourselves with a small pool of applicants when there is an opening. I've hired 2 principals since my arrival, and the list is short, mainly because Calhoun County is a rural county. There's not a lot of social life for those who desire to really get out and do some things on the weekend. You know, they'll have to travel for their outings. So it does not attract people very readily. So when we do attract people, they are from somewhere in the near vicinity, and they understand the environment and they understand the culture, and they're willing to be able to find other ways to be able to develop a full sense of life, of enjoyment and work at the same time. So what that means is that we take the leaders that we have and try to develop them further. For instance, we participate in GLSSI. Just recently, we sent an assistant principal to Gale assistant principal training. So in-house, we do what we do to contract with others to try to develop our people, because we know that the pool is very limited. So I think that we've decided that in the district, we're better off just developing who we have and try to get them to the capacity that we want them to be at in order for them to, in order for us to get the outcomes that we want.
So you're working with some other organizations?
Yes, yes. Also, in the near future, we hope to be able to dig a little deeper so that we can develop a leadership bench. And through our work with Albany State, the Wallace Foundation grant, we are in the works of developing a principal preparation program. And in that, we hope to be able to, number one, inspire others to be able to go through the program and become developed so that they can become effective principals. Number two, so that we can build a pool within the Southwest Georgia region. It would be a regional pool that we would help to develop, but it surely would give us an opportunity to pick the best and the brightest from what we have.
So Dr. Turner, how has the mindset changed? If I'm using correct terminology, has the mindset changed in Southwest Georgia, where perhaps the bench is not as full as you would want it to be, and perhaps, again, smaller pool of candidates? Has the mindset changed among you and your fellow superintendents in that part of the state?
My answer to that would be yes. I think that first we had to come to the realization of what the truth is, and that is that we are not meeting the needs of students. We are not moving the needle. So that is a hard conversation to have with people. It's a hard realization to have, but the truth is the truth. So we know that our principals, as we see them at this point, mostly are trained and are sharp in the area of operational leadership. So that was a conversation we continue to have over and over and over. Operational leadership is fine, but also there are other types of leadership that are necessary in order to be successful. Strategic leadership, instructional leadership is one of the areas where we found that we have the most weaknesses. So therefore our concentration in developing this program is to ensure that we strengthen our principals in that area. And the instructional leadership, we found that our principals need more training. And also being able to balance that instructional leadership with the operational leadership, not to diminish the importance of it, but to be able to have a good balance.
So Dr. Turner, you raise an interesting point, because I think all of us truly believe that effective principals are those who do focus on instruction. So Dr. Barker, for both you and Dr. Turner, how are we meeting that need? You know, why did you said, I see that, and I feel, perhaps, I'm not quoting you, but I feel okay with where we are with operational and management. But how are we addressing this need? Steve, you talked about the need for more coaching, perhaps, or protocols for coaching. Are there other things that we need that perhaps we're not getting or we're not seeing?
Well, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding out there, even among assistant principals who aspire to be principals, of what the job really involves. I think that's a fundamental step in any leadership development. The principalship is a lot harder than it was 15, 20 years ago. And you do have to be very skilled at a variety of leadership strategies. Anyone in my district will tell you academic achievement of our students is first and foremost. Safety as well, those two things. But I'll tell you, if you can't make political decisions in a charged environment and navigate people and keep a building spotless and do all those other things that come with the principalship, you can go down in flames even while your school is achieving well. I just had a discussion in the last 2 weeks with the principal about that very thing. And so I think any effort to train aspiring principals has got to look at the principalship collectively and globally. I don't know that you can diminish one side of that. I believe that's where coaching would be of such benefit, because often that assistant principal, while they're beside a good principal, they take a lot for granted. Good principal intercepts and prevents things from happening, and then the good leader gets a position one day and they get hit from behind oftentimes with something that they just didn't know how to handle. I noticed in some of the materials that you all have been provided, an ideal opportunity is an internship. But as the writer mentioned, it's costly. It's difficult for a district to do that at a high level. I've thought very, very long and hard about doing that. Even if you just have one leader at each level that you can put through that, at least you have three that have they're high-level leaders that are ready to step in should you find yourself in a crisis. But I do believe it's a holistic effort. You've got to look at the entire role of that principal. And I would say too, I think there's got to be in any leadership development program at least now in our district, and we've utilized GLSSI in the last couple of years to help us take a real hard look at our mindset and take a real hard look at our belief. I think if there's one fundamental belief I believe has to be instilled in any aspiring principal, is that every single student in every single building can learn at higher levels without question. And if you adopt that belief as a principal, it will affect every decision you make, from scheduling all the way through to the arrival and dismissal. That sounds easy in here, but there is still sometimes the notion out there of, well, you just don't understand, my kids. You don't understand these kids, those kids. And I believe any leadership development program would have to be a non-negotiable. That would eliminate a lot of the barriers that new principals find themselves in, because they're challenged on that sometimes by those in the building. And then finally, I think I'm rambling, but if it's okay. And then finally, I would say it needs to be a non-negotiable that the work that is done in that building led by that principal be research-based. If you can't point to research that supports that effort, And I believe it has no place in the school. We utilize Hattie's research in our instructional efforts. It's made a big difference, just the conversations that we have. So, and I look back, this is my 7th year as superintendent there, and I look back and I think, man, if I had started that day one, where would we be? Moving a good system to a great system is just as challenging as taking a turnaround district that's got to be turned around. Different set of problems, but the challenge is no less important.
For both superintendents, you've talked about how you're meeting your needs and some of those who perhaps are helping you with that. Dr. Barker, I think most of us again would agree with you wholeheartedly that the work of the principal is very different from the work of the assistant principal, and how you help assistant principals learn the difference, and especially after you appoint them, how they make that transition. And some do and some don't perhaps make that transition. But with that being said, I'd like for both of you to address, again, in a little more detail, the gaps or the needs that you have. In other words, if we gave you a magic wand today and a sack full of money, what would you do to address the needs of leadership in your school district? Dr. Turner?
Okay. One thing, can I go back to the previous question?
Absolutely.
Okay. One of the things when Dr. Barker mentioned a relentless effort to improve student outcomes and believe that students can learn and will learn, I find that to be an area of concern as well, because it's very challenging to work in a high poverty rural district, and sometimes I see the frustration on administrative faces when they don't see the needle moving, or there's not a significant amount of growth, the growth that they had expected. So, and I guess you could say that, I don't know how you train people for this, but if we could just look at or develop emotional intelligence, how to be able to handle the stresses of the job when you don't get the results that you need. How do you continue to inspire and encourage others to continue to do that work and to believe in it? And it comes off sometimes where sometimes they don't quite have that skill, so it turns into a demand: we must, we will, you will, or else. But to be able to inspire and motivate others takes a different kind of skill. So we can't really bully people into doing what we need them to be able to do to get the outcomes that we expect to have. So I think that's a need as well, developing that emotional intelligence to be able to handle the daily stresses of the job.
Dr. Barker, I think Dr. Turner's comment also touched on your comments about thinking more globally, being able, and then, this is my expression, but being adaptable or being agile. So is that a gap, again, following on Yolanda's comment? Do you see that emotional intelligence or that need to help people develop to be more agile in their behavior?
Yeah, I think there's two different phases at least to a leadership development program that we're discussing. I think one is as much preparation as you can get going into the position, and I think there's got to be a strong support for that principal during those first couple of years. You know, it's really no different than the classroom. You know, Hattie talks about surface learning, getting to transfer learning, where, you know, how to do bus dismissal and how to return phone calls and handle discipline and even do observations and meet all the guidelines the state has. That's pretty surface-oriented work, and you're going to struggle with it in year one, but we can get you through that. But taking that effort to a higher level in year 1, 2, and 3 so that you get your sea legs under you is a separate need. So if I was given an endless pot of money and resources, I think a leadership development program that allows assistant principals to be prepared as best they can when they step into the role. I'm not sure that's as labor intensive, but the second part where you provide 1, 2, and 3 year coaching for that new principal. And again, I go back to, I use the word protocols, but there is work out there that keeps you from leaving one behind. There's a lot of promise in a lot of assistant principals, but some principals, their gift is not coaching along an assistant principal, and they run a very good school, they get high achievement, they do everything well, it's just not their knack. But if they could be provided a research-based protocol to coach that assistant principal through, you're going to have a better product that you can put out there. And then, of course, district support and a little bit of that freedom to fail. I mean, they have to. They're going to mess up. I can promise you that. A lot of decisions made today.
Dr. Turner, take that magic wand.
The gap that I would like to close is, it goes back to instructional leadership. I don't want to keep harping on that, but it is just so very important. And I find that principals don't understand the relationship between curriculum, instruction, and assessments, and how they all must be aligned to the standards. And when one is out of whack, you don't get the outcomes that you expect to have. And I find that they just really don't understand that. They may pick one of them and try to develop one of those, hoping that they will get the increase that they're looking for, and it just doesn't happen. So I would, that is my number one thing that I would like to see strengthen principals.
Thank you, Dr. Turner. For both superintendents, again, sort of continuing, if we have the capacity, which may imply we have the funding or other resources, what would you recommend for this study committee's consideration as they think about the establishment of a leader academy for the state of Georgia? Specific considerations or specific recommendations that you would make. Steve, start with you.
Well, I think, and you all have looked a lot more at it than I have recently from the material that I was provided, but I do think there are good models out there. I think we've got some here in some districts that have been doing this work for a long time. I think we can borrow from things that are working, but I do think it needs to be systemic. I think it needs to be strong enough to withstand when people change jobs and move and the tide changes. I think there's really no reason that the Leadership Academy effort or leadership development effort would have to change with it. As if it's research-based, it's going to survive that. So that would be my number one comment, is to make sure that it's on point with what the research tells us.
Dr. Barker, how would you see that being created or implemented operationally? For example, would there be a central academy, or would it be regionally approached in terms of delivery? Again, to meet your specific needs. Well,
If we're going to get specific, with my needs, I want it to be regionally located in Coweta County. But you know, I don't think it can be done with one shop. I think the state is too large for that. I think it would have to be delivered across our state. I think the model that GLSI is using, I do not, just to give you an idea of whether or not that fits a leadership program or not, the way I utilize GLSI in our county, and we interviewed GLSI, we tested GLSI, I told them, I said, I'm going to bring a team, but we're interviewing you to see if I'm going to keep bringing teams. And I take a team that includes district leaders, I attend, and I take teacher leaders from each building. So we'll go with about 6 schools when we go. I don't take 31 when we go, and it's very intentional. It's a year-long effort. It's a commitment on the district. It's resources. it's money spent to go and spend that time together. So if we talk about the kinds of things that do make a difference, that type of model works. Whether that could be done on an individual leadership type effort would be a different conversation. But I think it's got to be that intention. And I also would say, I don't think you're going to be able to do anything that when you've had it running for a year, you look at it and go, man, we've got more principles than we know what to do with now. I think there's going to have to be a commitment that it's a 3 to 5 year before you'll really see the fruits of your labor.
Dr. Kern?
I too have had great experiences recently with GLSI, but in addition to the proposed academy, I'd also like to see included within the activities that the candidates would perform real life experiences that are meaningful and relevant to the work of the principal. So many times they were able to work in the classroom, but those experiences that they would gain from being with strong leaders that are actually in the schools would be most beneficial at every level, elementary, middle, and high. Because I find that sometimes the internships that they complete at their college and university, sometimes it's not a realistic experience. It may be just to go and observe a group, go and observe a school improvement team and come back. I like to see something more rigorous and something more real, so that when they're put in those environments, they're able to feel more competent and confident in what they do. In terms of where it would be located, I'd like to see something regional as well. But also in saying that all locations are equally as effective. So some standardization is necessary so that when leaders move or transfer from one part of the state to the other in a new work environment, we can know for a fact that they have been trained well and they are effective in what they do.
Thank you very much. Both of you talked about what you're doing and what you would like to see. What is your capacity now in terms of being able to fund efforts, and how do you fund those efforts? Dr. Barker?
Right now, most of our work is done within the district. As I said, we utilize GLSI. We are involved in the state organizations. I had principals that served on in leadership roles. By the way, I think that's important. I think exposure of aspiring principals to some of what goes on statewide in our organizations, leadership efforts in our organizations is important. But in our district, our capacity right now, as I said, we're intentional, we train assistant principals that we believe, we train them all, but we really identify those we think have promise, and we spend a good bit of our time helping them grow. We work with our principals to try to give them exposure. One thing we do, my summer school efforts are run by assistant principals, so that's a taste of the principalship before they ever receive one. We'll rotate that through middle and high school assistant principals. Those kind of opportunities do exist that you can plug into, and I think that does give them some of that in the moment. It's your responsibility to solve that problem. So I think that's one way. But for us, most of our work is within the district.
Most of our work is within the district. Also, one thing about Calhoun County is that many of the efforts for training that require funding is extremely difficult. The way that we were able to go to GLSI is through the funding through the Wallace Foundation that we received. Otherwise, there really would have been no way for a district like ours to be able to afford to send the participants to GLSI. So what we do is sometimes we partner up with other districts, and if I find a strong principal in another area, sometimes we partner up with that principal or superintendent, or participate in neighboring professional learning. Through our relationship with Albany State, we've grown to love and admire the work in Gwinnett County, so we have some opportunities for training there. Some of them require funds and some of them do not, but we do see we are offered the opportunity to participate in that. So we have to try a little harder to find opportunities to be able to fund the training. Sometimes I may be able to send 1 or 2 leaders out to come back and train others, but in terms of training teams, it's a little difficult.
A lot of talk nationally about the use of Title II Part A funds. Is that something either of you have thought about, or are you satisfied to the extent grant funding will allow you to meet your needs?
In Calhoun County, that's a different look as well. Our funds were cut in half. Our Title II funds were cut in half. Unfortunately, due to the fact that there is extensive traveling every time there is training, we spend a lot of our funds in just reimbursement for mileage, believe it or not. So we don't have a lot left after we do that, and after we do a few in-house trainings, there's not a lot left in Title II for us.
Similar for us, we use a lot of our professional learning funds, which we designate for the purpose for the efforts that we utilize for principals and assistant principals.
I appreciate both of you being here this morning. Excuse me, and I think you've done a great job of describing your perspective from a 22,000 student school district to a district with 651 children. But I very much heard a common thread that as superintendents you both understand and both believe that the leverage of the school leadership is incredibly important for the benefit of those children you serve, Dr. Turner, and the children that you serve. And again, I think all of the people here in the room this morning very much believe, as you do, Dr. Barker, that we've got to start with that belief that's held internally that all children can. So I appreciate your perspective. Mr. Wilbanks, Chairman Wilbanks, will share a little bit later about some efforts that the committee, through his leadership, will be exercising to gain an even broader perspective from superintendents across the state. But I want to give you one last opportunity for the study committee benefit. Is there anything you would like to leave the study committee with?
I'd like to say thank you again for the opportunity to provide a little insight, a little input for you as you move further in developing this academy. I just think that this is something that we need as we begin, as the accountability levels continue to increase for all leaders. If we're going to continue to do that, we need to ensure that they all have the adequate training so that they are able to meet the expectations that we have. Right now, currently, some of them are struggling just because of the training, the type of training they've had in the past. But if we can know for a fact and ensure that we're giving them what they need and be able to meet their needs, they will not struggle as much to reach those levels of accountability that we're currently expecting them to reach.
The only thing I would add, it's going to sound like a negative comment, but it's really not. Some of the best trainings that I have been to, spent some time on the front end trying to talk those out of something that might be halfway committed to it. And I think one of the things that happens in the assistant principal moving up to the principalship ranks is they think they want to do the job, but with just a little bit of enlightening, they realize they jumped on something they were not prepared for. So I would encourage you, as you look at a model, that early in that model, that the participants we try to give them a realistic view of what the principalship nowadays is really like. And those that don't want to return for the next session, we thank them for their time. That will save a lot of difficulties down the road.
Thank you, Chairman Will Banks.
Well said. Let me thank you for your time this morning. We do have about 5 minutes. If any member wants to, committee wants to ask a question, since we have Dr. Parker and Dr. Turner. I'm telling you, we couldn't have got two better people for the panel. I'm sorry that the other two were not able to be with us today, but we've heard more from them than we would have otherwise, so that's been good too. So any questions any panel member has? Ted?
I appreciate the work that both of you do in your district, and I appreciate you being here this morning. Do either of you have any of the schools in your district that are in the lowest 5 percentile performance in the state?
We have Ruth Hill Elementary that was this year. Of course, CCRBI hasn't come out this year, but this year they saw marked improvement. And many of the things that I mentioned just a few moments ago were results of the work that went on at Ruth Hill around the principal and the assistant principal. So we had, I expect Ruth Hill to be well above that percent this year.
We have our elementary school that is in that category. And our CCRPI score, I believe it did come up for the elementary school, but I think that our focus has not been intense, as I mentioned before, on analyzing data and specifically defining, going in and out. Okay. And specifically defining where those areas of need are. We have become more intentional in doing that. We continue to work with the principals and the teachers on being able to do that. So we do expect some improvement for this year. This is the RBI.
Do you feel like the schools that are in that lowest 5%, generally speaking, exhibit a greater challenge or a more distinct challenge than schools do to leadership as a whole? I say that from the standpoint, this whole concept came out of the Turnaround School Initiative Bill, House Bill 338. And all along we heard, well, people just do not understand the challenges that are in these schools. The whole concept of this Leadership Academy was to answer the question, are the challenges different? Are they greater? Or can they be specifically defined, and what can we do to train leadership that is specifically fitted and chosen with, as you said, Dr. Parker, sometimes you have to counsel people away from a direction if they don't appear to have the fundamental skills that it take to be successful. In addressing the lowest 5% of the schools, and also conversation with the districts that have some of those schools, I've heard them say repeatedly, we just cannot find the leadership that can function well in these schools. Would y'all like to comment on that in terms of the way this whole initiative of a leadership academy is structured? That, I can say this from being there at the crafting of legislation, that was the target market to try to get trained leadership who either was currently in the district that needed specific training and intervention, or either to train a cadre of leadership that could go into the district and would be willing to go into a school in the district that exhibits these high challenges?
I think it goes back to, one thing is, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about the emotional intelligence. It is a very, very tough job to work in a district like ours, because the growth comes about so slowly. I mentioned it's an extremely high poverty level. There are students who go home without internet. There's either number one, they can't afford it, or number two, it's just not in their area. There's extremely low parental engagement, where the parents just trust us to be able to educate their students and don't feel comfortable enough being able to come to the school and being able to work with teachers and school administrators. So it's almost as if they just hand you the students on a platter and say, here you go, we trust you. And we all know that school partnership, that school home partnership is critical to student success. Also, with that, going back to the emotional intelligence, school administrators have to understand the issues that take place in the home that spill over into the school. So that's why I said that is so important for them to be able to hear and understand that and see how it relates to the outcomes that they expect to have, because it's frustrating, it's challenging, and it does take a relentless attitude to be able to service the students. It's not that the students are any different than anywhere else otherwise. It's just that those factors have to be taken into consideration. They have to be known so that you can develop plans to be able to combat those things. And that's not easy. It's easier said than done.
Okay, very good. Anyone else? Representative Sessions?
Dr. Barker and Dr. Turner both. I heard you say something that was common across both your districts, that over time your principals tend to be very good operationally at sort of making the operations of the school function. You know, the multitasking and getting the buses to work and all those things, that happens over time. But as I listened to both of you, it sounds like if we could put our finger right on the key point, it would be taking principals, taking assistant principals, and as they become principals, making them kind of into world-class instructional leaders where they're able to go into a classroom and really mentor teachers to be the best teachers they can be. I mean, that sounds like that's the thing that we don't have is a principal that can run a good school, that can keep people out of trouble, and in fact, even over time, be able to make these kind of touchy political decisions of running a building. But those things, it sounds like, tend to happen over time with the right people. But it sounds like the real traction is going to come from putting principals or assistant principals in a training program where they're not just being taught to. They get presentations, but they're actually engaged in becoming these great teacher mentors. If they can become great teacher mentors, they go back to their school and take these committed teachers who are working with kids who don't have the parent involvement, all those things we see. And if that principal is equipped to be a world-class teacher mentor, to sit in and do observations and then do counseling sessions, and make the counseling session go very well, and then follow up with follow-on observations, to me that's what it sounds like the it is. And I don't know if our training programs are laser focused on taking our principals and making them into the best teacher mentors they can be. Because it really seems like we got to make them into teacher mentors if we're going to get traction. Is that right assessment?
I don't disagree at all. But I will tell you, in the last 5 years, I've hired much stronger instructional leaders than I have organizational leaders. And there's still a leak that springs up back here. You've got to prepare the whole principal, because if you Instructional leadership is the key. That's where we hang our hat now. But I hired 3 new ones this year who are very strong, and 2 of them are very strong instructional. But there's some difficult things that are hitting them right now. And they are instructional Navy SEALs. I mean, they can sit that teacher in that paper, they can look at data, they can diagnose, they can help teachers. But it's got to be the whole picture. If so, you're right, instructional leadership is the key, but I think you've got to tend those other pieces. And Senator Jenkins, if I could just briefly speak to your question. At Ruth Hill, we were able to drop anything non-essential to student learning. I mean, and the well-being of the child. And we were able to put intense district support at a high level of accountability in every leadership team meeting, at grade level meetings, focused on every minute of everyday instruction. That's what made the difference for us there. Making the main thing to move that academic needle. And all else had to just wait. A school that's performing 88, 92 on the CCRPI, that leader has a whole different challenge, because they can turn around and a school can be on cruise control, and you're not moving that college-bound student, you're not challenging them at the level of rigor they need to be challenged, and you'll get pushback. Hey, wow, we're performing well. So I think there are 2 different situations you find yourself in, and they do require the same skill sets, but each one of them has a different thing standing in their way. The turnaround school has got, that principal does have a green light to push as hard as they need to. And that other principal may fight that. If that makes sense.
Do you see the line much longer for those who apply to go to the 88 to 92 schools than you do somebody to a 50 schools?
The application pool?
Yes, sir.
Oh, yes, sir. I think you'll see it longer there. Yeah,
I think that's our problem.
that's right.
Yeah.
Dr. Turner, would you speak to that instructional leadership question?
Yes. I think what you're saying is extremely important, because for interpersonal skills, I think it goes beyond communication, but it goes into being able to collaborate, being able to engage others in conversation. And a lot of times that's a very difficult thing to do for school leaders, because we're not trained to be able to do that, to be able to sit down with a team, take a piece of data and discuss it and disaggregate it and come up with results. That part we're able to do, and sometimes it's just hard to engage others. So I find that those skills sometimes of being able to, yes, they may be strong instructional leaders, like mentioned, but being able to balance all of those skills in such a way that they become a whole principle, it's been challenging.
We have time for one more question. I believe Senator Miles Sims wanted to respond.
Thank you. The question is, are there other barriers that you find in your districts that prevent you from developing leaders in your buildings? And shout out to Dr. Turner, because she's from my district and we choose well. But we still have a lot of challenges. And from a personal experience as a legislator, going into some of these school districts, you're banished. You want to help, but you will find that there are folks that do not want you to come in and help. That's an obstruction to the state and to us. They look at us, you know, in a very suspicious nature, that you're coming to spy on us and that kind of thing. But we're really trying to do the best that we can to help and give assistance where needed. So that was my question. What are there other barriers that you have in your districts?
Well, one barrier that we have really is just people resources. With a very small staff that we have, a lot of times there's not another leader that I could use as a coach to mentor someone. There are only 4 leaders in the entire district, school leaders. So that coaching that we talked about earlier, it's vital for us. You know, we get the certification and we get the training, but there's still additional training that's needed above and beyond what's required at the university level. So that's one of the things. Just people resources, financial resources, of course, is a huge barrier.
I don't necessarily have a specific thing I can point to make as an example, but consistency, I believe, is vital. When school leaders are turning on a dime every time to have to implement or adjust to a new something, it makes it takes a good situation and can make it very, very challenging. And I think I've seen that effort from the legislature in the last couple of 3, 4, 5 years. You all have been intentional about trying to eliminate anything that's not essential from your end of things, and I thank you all for that. That consistency in what we're doing, so that as we train these principals and send them out, they don't wake up one morning and the rules of the game have changed. I think we'll go a long way if we can keep at those fundamental things that we know are important, again, that are research-based and show us what to focus on.
Thank you.
Okay, let's give Dr. Barker and Dr. Turner a big round of applause for this. I think the only thing we can offer you today in the way of remuneration is we're going to have lunch today, and I believe it's liverwurst sandwich, is that right? No. But hey, if you can, and Dr. Peffel, maybe we'll take a 5-minute break while the other panel assembles, and we'll be ready to go. You think we'll take a 5-minute break? Good, I bet we can.
Once I'm ready to also help on some break. When had it done, and they didn't know it happened, but I didn't know it happened. Really don't want to least I didn't. I didn't know that it was that serious.
While we're waiting for you other members to get back, you do have a folder that's just been placed at your table. That's a one-page handout about information of each of the speakers that you'll hear from. So you may want, as they speak, pull their folder out and jot some notes down. You can do that. Okay, Dr. Pfeffel, get ready.
Thank you, Chairman Will Banks. I'm very pleased this morning to be able to welcome colleagues from across the state of Georgia who represent programs that in many ways are designed to help us prepare leaders more effectively, support leaders more effectively, do some of the things that you heard Dr. Barker and Dr. Turner talk about earlier this morning. So very briefly, I want you to look at your blue folder. And in that blue folder, you'll see, first of all, you'll see several things. You should be able to find the representatives, and I'm going to quickly introduce them to you. And then you'll also be able to see the instructions that they were given to prepare for today. And you'll see those 10 areas that we asked them to address. So each of them prepared a one-page, could be front and back, but a one-page handout that addresses these 10 areas that you see. So first of all, when you look at their handout, you'll clearly, quickly see who they are. You'll begin to see some language about audiences, perhaps that they gear their program toward, cost of their program, historical data, and a really important piece that we asked about was evidence of impact. So one thing that I failed to do this morning, Dr. Davis, can you help me just So one thing that I failed to do this morning was to provide you with that map of the state of Georgia that Mr. Will Banks referred to. And we thought perhaps having a map of Georgia does several things. One, it might help us as we hear program providers talk about their program. Perhaps you could make your own notes as to those parts or those counties or those districts in the state where they are providing their program. We perhaps thought that a map might also be a real good way, a reminder about how large the state of Georgia is and how vast we are, not only in our similarities as Georgians, but also some of the differences we see across the state. So you now have that map, and again, my apology for not getting that to you earlier. So with that being said, let me introduce the members of our distinguished panel, and I'm going to start here on my right and your left. Dr. Leslie Hazel Bussey is the Interim Director of the Georgia Leadership Institute for School Improvement. Next to her is Mr. Justin Old, who is the Director of Pioneer Reset, Cleveland, Georgia. Next to Justin is Hal Beaver. Hal is the Executive Director for the Elementary Principals and associated with the Georgia Association of Educational Leaders. Next to Hal is Dr. Jim Cars. Dr. Jim Cars is representing Georgia State University's Principal Center. Next to
Dr. Carr's is Lori Allison, who is representing Northeast Georgia RESA. And last but not least, our colleague and friend, Dr. Mac Bullard, who is representing a program perhaps that's a little different from the other 5 in that he is district-based. So he is representing Griffin Spalding School District. So again, I give you just a moment to look at those one page. Again, in Glissy's case, it's a front and back. But you'll begin to get a sense of what these programs are providing, ranging from a new program with Northeast Georgia RESA to some programs that have been in place for some time. For example, Glissy might be an example of that. Georgia State University's Principal Center might be another example of that. So again, I will leave these handouts and we will not read to you, but perhaps through our conversation together, we will be able to highlight some of the elements that are alike and perhaps some of the elements that are different and unique across these programs. So with that being said, what I would like each panel member to do is to describe where do you serve. So we see this big map of Georgia. So be very specific. Dr. Bussey, I'll start with you. What is the geographic coverage for the Georgia Leadership Institute for School Improvement? Doesn't need to be real close.
Okay.
Farther back is better. It's on.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Petzl. Thank you, Chairman Wilbanks, and the committee for inviting us here to be part of this conversation and contribute to this endeavor to close some gaps in Georgia's schools. To answer your question, Dr. Petzl, the first letter in the Glissy acronym is Georgia, and so the span of our services does reach all corners of the state. But it is really driven by district demand and whether or not those districts are stepping into a place of readiness to partner with us. And so I want to just really follow on that conversation we heard from Dr. Gardner and Dr. Turner this morning and note that starting point, the point of having a superintendent with that clear vision of what he or she wants for leaders and for teachers and students in their schools is really the critical precursor to our partnering with them, whether it be through our Base Camp Leadership Summit work, which is what you heard Dr. Turner and Dr. Barker talk about, or some other work that we do, which is less well known, but focused more exclusively on aspiring leaders. But you'll see on the handouts, we try to create a little mini map just to show you that the districts that we partner with are all over the state. Many of them are in the general metro area, but we do work with districts, particularly at Base Camp and Leadership Summit, from every corner of the state.
Okay, so again, I appreciate the fact that you included that mini map, and that's very clear. Again, as we look at the state of Georgia, that you have provided services in several areas of the state. But it also helps us to identify some areas perhaps that have not been touched by your particular program. Justin, I introduced you earlier and said you were from Cleveland, Georgia. So what does that mean for your coverage area? And again, be as succinct and specific about, as you know, committee members are looking at that map of the state of Georgia.
Well, follow up 441 up into the mountains, and you'll run into Cleveland. We service 16 school systems in extreme northeast Georgia. From Davis Group in Hall County that has 26,000 students to Towns County and Hiawassee, Georgia that has 2,600 students. So the variability is extreme. We do serve our 16 school systems, and we provide professional learning in all aspects of education. And what's unique, Senator Tippins, you mentioned this last time we got together. You said, you know, RESA director, you sure are eager to help and support. That's what we're here for. And I think that PSC and David and Hal and Leslie and Gary, you mentioned, and Martha Ann, we're here to support and we're here to provide. And basically, the way our professional learning is developed when we talk about leadership, professional learning, is doing just this. We sit down and listen to the superintendents, and they provide the information that we need to develop the professional learning. And so at Pioneer, we are so excited that we're at the table, because I don't know how often we are at the table. We're here to provide service not only to our school systems, but to DOE and to the legislators. We're here to partner. I don't want to read this list.
And I think the committee would appreciate it.
Okay, so I'm not going to read that to you.
So again, for the purpose of the conversation right now, you've talked about the region that your region serves. So we're going to come back and dig a little deeper as we continue the conversation. So thank you. Hal, talk about the area that your program serves.
First of all, I'd like to say that I hired Laurie and I hired Dr. Turner, so the best thing you can do is hire good people. So that's very important. I always hire people smarter than I am, which is a good thing. With Gail, the Georgia Association of Educational Leaders, we serve the whole state. Georgia's the sixth largest public school system in the country. And it's the largest state east of the Mississippi River, if you want to look at your map, geographically anyway. And our program, our Aspiring Principals program, we serve the entire state, mostly rural Georgia. We do have some metro folks that sign up for the program. It's a year-long program that we provide, and we're excited to offer that opportunity. And the best thing about it is I try to get the best people in the state to come be speakers and be presenters for the Gale program. And it lasts an entire year. It's 6 meetings actually, and it's mostly for K-12 assistant principals.
Hal, talk a little bit more specifically. Is it a safe assumption to say that you have not worked in all 159 counties?
It is safe to say that.
Okay, so narrow that down. When you say we generally serve or work in some of the rural areas, does that include, every area of the state from northwest, northeast?
Absolutely. It's the program is offered to everyone, and even in the program itself, I've moved the locations around. So the first meeting's in Perry, Georgia, because it's the center of the state. So if I have somebody from White County or Habersham County, they have to go to the center of the state. The next meeting that I have is in Savannah, Georgia. So that takes care of my folks down in southeast Georgia. The next meeting is in Athens, Georgia. So we moved the program around so and try to cut down on travel for some of the attendees. So that's how we run the program. That's how it currently exists.
Okay, thank you. Now, Jim, talk a little bit about the coverage for the Georgia State University's Principal Center.
Thank you, Glenn. We appreciate the opportunity to be here. The Principal Center's been in existence since 1984, so that's 30 plus years. We've been providing professional development for principals, and we have also covered the state over those many years. Most recently, we have had a cohort of aspiring assistant principals in Valdosta City Schools. We've partnered with them. We do our Expert Leaders Series. We've partnered with Baldwin. We've partnered with Bibb. We are currently in negotiations with Okefenokee RESA to do a assistant principal cohort down there, which is an 8-session cohort. And we're working with Glenn County to do some work over there to help them develop a pipeline of leadership. So we too have covered the state.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Lori represents Northeast Georgia RESA. And again, Lori, we see a little map on your handout, so that helps us see a little more specifically and talk about your coverage area.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm excited about the opportunity to share with you.
I'm excited about the opportunity to share with you about what the Northeast Georgia RISA Leader Academy is about. I actually just began in this role in July, so the program is in the planning stages currently. And we are planning to meet the needs of the 14 districts in Northeast Georgia RISA that you see in your map on the handout. These range in size from the largest districts like Barrow County, Clark County, around 14,000, to the smallest districts being small city school systems, with the smallest being around 1,400 students. So it's quite a wide range. I want to give thanks to our Chief, Mr. Wilbanks, because I was specifically hired for this position because of my 30 years in Gwinnett County schools. And the superintendents in the neighboring districts, in these 14 districts, were particularly interested in learning from Gwinnett and what had worked well. And I was tasked with the opportunity to develop something that could be modeled after Gwinnett, but also be adapted to meet the needs of small rural school systems. And so we're in the process of developing, branding, and meeting the needs of 14 systems, and particularly are looking at it from all levels of the organization. The 14 superintendents are serving as an advisory board for our academy, and they're interested in us meeting the needs of teacher leaders, aspiring leaders, district level leaders, and principals.
Thank you, Laurie. Dr. Mac Buller is a school leader who has served at all levels, but I appreciate the fact that he has served at the university level, but is back at the local school district. So, Mac, are we beating a dead horse, or is it pretty clear to figure out where you cover?
I think you all can figure it out. I cover Griffin-Spalding County School System. We're a school district right outside of the metropolitan Atlanta area. We think we're still inside of Metro. We're just the last district before you leave Metro and go into Middle Georgia and go into the Macon area. We have 10,200 students in our school district and 18 schools, and the need for quality leadership is never more evident. With transition, with issues in terms of that the two superintendents spoke about this morning, differences in training from different programs where leadership comes, the expectations and the changes that have occurred in terms of what the expectation is in terms of student performance, and also ensuring that staff is also performing at their highest level. Principals have to be agile and they have to be skilled in many areas. So we want to make sure that we bring them to the table ready, and not that they're getting into the seat trying to get ready. So our program is only in its third year, the beginning of its third year, and we partner with a couple of the programs that are here. Griffin RISA is not on the panel, but we partner with Griffin RISA to help develop our aspiring leaders. Those are typically teachers, counselors who are interested in looking at leadership and considering leadership, potentially the assistant principalship. We also partner with GALE, Aspiring Principals Program, for our aspiring principals, because they do have an aspiring principals program, and those are typically assistant principals in our district. We have some individuals who are coordinators who want to be principals as well. We also aspire with the Georgia School Superintendents Association to help develop district office leaders. They have a district office leadership program, and we have a few of our high-performing principals that we have tapped to try to develop a pipeline, if you will, for our central office level, and we also provide our leaders who are current principals support as well through a Leaders at Work program. Our early career principals are also a target group for us, as the two superintendents mentioned earlier. That is a critical role for our early career principals, and we partner with the University of Georgia Early Career Principals Residency Program to help develop those leaders. So we are local in our district in terms of focusing on our local needs, but we have to utilize the expertise and the muscle of larger programs, because we simply don't have the capacity to do the level of development that we have internally.
And that addresses, I believe, one of the comments that Dr. Turner made this morning again, was whether the district, based on size, perhaps other factors, have the capacity. So Mac, you did a really nice job of not only describing the fact and limiting our understanding that you're in Griffin Spalding.
Yes.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
But we also learned some things that I want other program providers now to drill down. So you talked about different levels of leadership or areas of focus. So I want each of our other 5 program providers to help the study committee understand what is your emphasis. For example, is it on pre-service leadership? Is it on novice leaders, and particularly a focus on those who are in their first couple of years? You heard Dr. Barker talk about that. Or is it on those who perhaps have been in the business for a while, maybe mid-career individuals? And last but not least, do you have any focus on working with those leaders in our chronically lowest performing schools? So again, I would appreciate you being succinct in your answer. So there's no right answer and there's no wrong answer. It's simply sharing with the study committee, this is what we focus on: pre-service, in-service, mid-career, or as we sometimes refer to it, turnaround. So Laurie, why don't you start off?
We are focusing on all of the above, and the superintendents in our area have asked us to begin with the teacher leader. There are many of our systems have established principles that are in place and have longevity, and they see us as we plan for succession, that we need to have strong teacher leaders and aspiring leaders and ready to step into future positions. And so our main focus in our initial cohort is teacher leaders, and I think that distinguishes us from some of the other programs currently. And it's going to be an opportunity for us to focus on how we can help teacher leaders have the capacity to focus on school improvement efforts at that classroom level, department level, team level, in order to move the work forward to improve student achievement.
Dr. Cars.
The Principal Center also covers the gamut in terms of the different programs that we offer. We try and partner with our districts to meet the district's needs. For example, in Fulton County, we work with their new principals program. We do the induction for them. We have a 3-year program which includes coaching by retired principals who have been successful, not only in terms of their successful schools, but in terms of their instructional knowledge and base, so that we can build instructional leaders. But we also start with an aspiring leaders cohort program where different districts will send their aspiring leaders to us. And most recently, we've added the Coaches Collaborative, because we find that the instructional piece is so much geared toward the coach, the academic coach in the building, and most of them come from teacher leaders, and they become academic coaches, and that provides them the knowledge and the base to move on to be that assistant principal, who will then get, in that role, will get the organizational structure and the political adroitness that maybe they would miss in the coaching role. And then, of course, we have our first-year Principals Academy, which we draw principals from all over the state to, and we encourage them to come back. So we have had now our 2nd and 3rd year collaborative. Those principals have come back to continue their knowledge and their instructional focus.
Al?
All the above. We try to focus on the Aspiring Principals program. The name kind of covers what we do. They're assistant principals aspiring to be principals. We have some in the Cider Academy, the company, School for the Blind, School for the Deaf. They also have to follow all the state standards, so they're also in our program. But we cover, I try to get the best people in the state to come and present on effective personnel practices, how to hire and retain, how to document and get rid of. But closing school, opening school, legal issue, code of ethics, communicating with stakeholders. These are all the issues that we try to cover because assistant principals a lot of times get left out. You know, the principal goes to a lot of things and comes back, and the assistant principal runs the school. So ours focus mainly on assistant principals in the building that are aspiring to be school level administrators.
Good, thank you. Justin, now's the time if you'd like to point to the handout that is in the study committee's folder, if there's anything specific you want to point to. But again, the question, do you focus on pre-service, in-service, mid-career, or turnaround?
So our focus is what our superintendents need us to focus on, which right now is all areas of leadership. We try to focus on every one of these aspects that these individuals have talked about. The unique part about Pioneer is that we try to provide coaching. And that coaching, based on research, has shown that is the most important piece, also the most expensive piece. And so they have allowed us to be able to do that by providing additional funds to say, hey, we want that coaching aspect. We want that mentoring aspect. It's very similar to our Georgia TAP program. And now we're developing a leadership program that's tagged to certification, which David, you and I have worked on tremendously hard to get that for our administrators. But that coaching piece is so critical that our superintendents will make us focus on.
When I look at your handout, Justin, where do I find that? Is that?
It's on the back.
It's on the back?
Yes, sir. Second to the bottom.
Okay, thank you. That helps me to sort of isolate that piece. And last but not least, Leslie, we've heard, again, several people talk about listen, but is your focus on pre-service, in-service, mid-career, turnaround?
So I think one of the things that is important to set in context is that Lizzie isn't thinking about how do we create a pipeline of leaders so that as we get vacancies, we have lots of people sort of stepping in to fill them. That's kind of a last resort situation, and where we ideally have people in districts is that there aren't principals constantly dropping out. That the idea is that the work of a principal is supported on two levels. It's supported through the work that they're doing with teacher leaders and their building leaders, as well as the support that they get from district leaders. And so it's a long way around here, question, Dr. Pepple. But our work is with that system so that we are creating in the work of school improvement, not parallel leadership development work that's separate from what schools should be doing to improve instruction, but that transformation happens holistically with teams that are intact, including superintendents and building leaders and their aspiring leaders, but that they're all growing and working together. And it may not be that we're calling it something separate called leadership development for a pre-service leader, but it would look like a teacher in his or her role being engaged in more empowering roles that are advancing the goals of the school under the leadership of the district. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't point out that a lot of Lizzie's historical design has very much been inspired by Mr. Wilbanks, the excellent leadership in Gwinnett County by a lot of the original leaders and current leaders in the organization. And so, all of the above.
Okay. Very quick question. Who's your customer? Leslie.
Well, our decision-making customer is the superintendent. Our ultimate customer are communities who are served by having their students well served by teachers.
Justin, who's your customer?
Well, we have 15 school systems that we represent. So we have communities, students, teachers, leaders, and our superintendents. Those are the ones that we focus on.
How?
Assistant principals, elementary, middle, and high school.
Okay. Jim?
Principals, district superintendents.
Lori?
The superintendents of the 14 Northeast Georgia RESAs have clearly said that our customer are the children that are in the schools in these 14 areas.
Matt, who are your customers?
Our superintendent, our principals, and our assistant principals at our schools. We really are trying to focus on developing a bench of quality individuals, because when the pool is open, you don't always get the quality that you look for.
So again, it's been a great benefit that you spent the time to respond to the initial inquiry about sharing information about your program. So I'm going to give you like a 10-second. What's the one thing you would want the study committee to walk away with, or the takeaway from your one-page handout? What would that be, Matt?
I want you to see that we are looking to focus on each level of leadership. Leadership in the classroom level in terms of aspiring leaders, because those components of leadership are just as relevant on school teams, teacher teams, as they are on leadership teams. And a great classroom teacher can be groomed into a quality leader in the school. Quite frankly, I find some of the best come being a great classroom teacher. But the work itself is a task of giving them content, giving them experiences, and practice. They must have an opportunity to practice. What we've experienced is classroom-based work, presentation style development is good, but isn't always sufficient. They need opportunity to learn, but then to take what they're learning and actually practice it in a real context. And in a mid-sized district, and I'm calling us mid-sized, in a mid-sized district with high poverty in your district and principals who are working 100 miles per hour every day, having that quality coaching and mentoring ongoing for those aspiring leaders is difficult. And
Matt, let me, again, you took a little bit more than 10 seconds.
Yes.
So we appreciate everything you said there, but again, we don't want to be reading because they can read. So again, 10 seconds or less. Lori, what is it you want the study committee to take away from the handout you prepared for them?
We recognize that leadership at all levels of the organization is critical, and that the key to making that happen is to develop our own, and that we are committed to developing our own so that we can improve achievement and success for all the students in Northeast Georgia RESA.
Thanks, Lori. Jim, 10 seconds.
10 seconds. We would like you to come away with the fact that the Principal Center works and partners with districts and to develop programs that both meet the needs of the district and meet the needs of the principals who are being trained, or the leaders that are being trained. I would point to the area in our handout that talks about our new partnership with the Georgia Department of Education, in which we will be training all their district and school effectiveness trainers. And that is a big undertaking for us, but the DOE is very interested in moving forward with a comprehensive training program that they can help their schools that are in that bottom 5%.
How?
Gail provides wonderful opportunities to develop leadership. That's what we do.
Justin.
So we talked about a couple things that the superintendents mentioned. We mentioned regional approach. That's what the RESAs are about. Your foundation is set to be able to provide that and help. District Tippins, you talked about, it's hard to attract administrators. We're about developing in-house. It's hard for us to track in extreme Northeast Georgia in the mountains. So we develop in-house. Ms. Sims, you talked about not allowing people to come in and help. Well, the RESAs are here to develop those relationships, and we understand because we've been in those schools. Mr. Stetson, you talked about instructional leadership. You talk about whole picture, and that's what the Reeses are here to be able to provide. So, as a shout out to the Reeses and somebody that's willing to help, we're here.
Thank you, Judge. Leslie?
10 seconds. I would say the thing that we have to take away is thinking about the importance of leadership development being not just the work of principals or the people in the building. It's not a problem that a superintendent can say, you know what, I've got this issue, we've got principals leave, we've got to build more principals. That the solution should involve that superintendent, him or herself, and his or her cabinet and critical members who create the conditions that principals will either be successful in or will enjoy. And so that intact team that includes that district piece is a critical element of our design, and we think, and you heard earlier, I think, from an exemplar superintendent for whom that model can be successful.
So I want to thank all of you again for being here this morning, for preparing your responses. And Chairman Wilbanks and Joint Study Committee members, again, I would encourage you to look at two things. One, again, in your packet, the 10 areas that we attempted to narrow this focus on, and apply that, again, to the handouts that you have on the programs here. Again, I think all of us would agree that we appreciate all of the individuals and the programs represented by these programs. The bigger question, perhaps, again, for the state of Georgia might be, what is scalable? At what level is that scalability? And what is sustainable? And why do we want to sustain it? And the answer would be because we have evidence that there is a return on the investment that's made in this. So again, I often think of that in terms of evidence of impact. So again, I appreciate the distinguished panel of experts and program providers here this morning. I appreciate your response to that. Mr. Wilbanks, I'll turn the floor to you.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have maybe 3 minutes. Just remember, your question stands between us and lunch, but if there are any committee members that yes, Barbara?
I just have a question for you. How do you measure whether or not, you're successful? And if we have so many quality programs, why do we feel like we have a lack of leadership? What's the problem? Why did the study committee be formed?
At Georgia State, the Principal Center, we evaluate every program we do, and we examine the data from those evaluations, and we make adjustments based on those evaluations. Also, an indication for us as to whether we're successful, does the district come back to us and ask us to do more, which we have had. And as far as the lack of leadership, I think they talked about it in the first session, and that's our districts need to grow their own.
And to add that, as far as RESAs, we're 16 RESAs, and we represent every county. Every RESA is not treated equally. When you're talking about financially, your board of control, my board of control, charges themselves a different fee than what Northeast Georgia charges themselves. So at Pioneer, our superintendents charge themselves $10.50 per FTE. That's close to $750,000 that's pumped into Pioneer to provide what they want and what they need. At other RESAs where you only have 5 districts in that RESA, they might only charge themselves 50 cents to $1 because they have the capacity to provide what it is that they need. Where in Southwest or Southeast Georgia, it might be a little bit different. So that is something that's unique to RESAs that a lot of people do not understand. We're not charging our superintendents, they charge themselves based on professional learning that they like to have.
Senator
Do any of you have specific areas of training and instruction specifically for those schools that are turned low performing as a particular segment of your training program?
That's the beginning of our work with the DOE, is specifically what they wanted us to do was to train the, too close?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What they specifically wanted us to do is to train the effectiveness specialists they have out in the field who work with those low-performing schools.
Maybe I missed it. Do you have a specific course of instruction or a particular segment of your training program that deals with low-performing schools?
Senator Tippins, we provide, and this is based on what our superintendents have asked, strict focus on low-performing schools based on the data. We have our own data team that goes and meets with the administrators to look at their specific data results. Hall County doesn't need us for that. They have their own division, but our smaller systems do. We had 3 focus schools. We assigned curriculum specialists along with our data team to go meet with those 3 schools, and we were able to help them. It wasn't just us. We were able to help them get off that list. And so that was specific for those individual schools.
The only thing I would add is we use a very similar approach around bringing a process to a school, regardless of what the problems of practice are. So if it is a lowest performing school that's coming to us, we're going to walk them through a very similar process of data analysis, root cause analysis. So to your question very directly, we don't have a unique process, except for in the case of when we develop a new competency model, and I'm looking at you, David, because we do this in Hall County, but in those districts where we do aspiring leaders, which is on the flip side of that handout, we do walk districts through a design team process to articulate a leadership competency model. If they're a district with a lot of low-performing schools, what should come up and surface through that conversation are some of the specific dispositions. This goes to Dr. Turner's point around emotional intelligence. What are those unique leader dispositions that are required? It might be, like Dr. Barker said, that it's the same work, but who is the right person to step in and do that work? The distinction there is probably a selection thing. Right, Dr. Davis said it probably happens at the time of when you're hiring and bringing on the person, less that what they do is so much magically different. It's more that dispositional profile of who is most likely to be successful in that setting.
Do we have a problem with our best educators wanting to be head principals? I mean, is there a morale issue? You talk about the big step and all the pressure that's there today in 2017. Do we have an issue with the best and brightest in our systems wanting to be head principal? I'd just like an answer from each of you, if you could, very brief. Is there an issue?
Unequivocally, yes, which is why we feel it's so important to have that holistic approach, which is about creating a different kind of culture, a different kind of place that is not just really an inspiring and rigorous and joyful learning environment for children, but it's a place where adults want to come to learn and grow and aspire to make that system even better and build that commitment, not just compliance. So unequivocally, yes, from our management.
And I agree with that. I think one of the things that our superintendents want us to work on is creating that foundation of support. You're not in this alone. Yes, it's a tough job, but we're here to support you and provide you with what you need. And that's the culture at Pioneer and a lot of our reasons is that we can provide you with what it is that you need based on your experiences. And you're not alone.
I think that our assistant principals, and I go back to being, I think they're left out a lot. I think they're in their buildings 24/7, and I think the professional development that we provide gives them an opportunity to get the professional learning that they need and broadens their perspective how to be a good school leader. But I think we have some wonderful aspiring people out there. It's just capture them and give them the professional development they need so they'll be successful when they get in position.
And I simply ask it not to, I mean, we could all share, I know there's wonderful people that want to go be principals, but do we have a problem? If we perceive everything's great, then we misperceive if there's an issue. I just want to hear, is there an issue? And I'm hearing there is an issue with people wanting to take up and step in the crucible.
I think there's an issue in public education, period, with people wanting to go into public education. And that creates a problem not only at the teacher level, but also at the administrative level. So yes, I think there is an issue.
And I agree with that. We're in a situation where we're short of teachers, we're short of leaders. And some time ago, you had to have 5-8 years experience as an assistant principal before you'd be considered for a principalship. Now, people are moving into the principalship after 2 and 3 years in the assistant principal's job. And as Dr. Barker said earlier, it's a different world now than when I was a principal. It's a much different world, a much different job.
My answer tends to be yes and no, because as I see some of the candidates who are interested in principalship, I see that they may need more training and opportunities to develop their ability to lead an entire school or staff. So I have seen, as we've had openings in the Northeast Georgia RESA area, that we might have a wide range of applicants for those principal positions, and we're wanting to fill the gap of the leadership and training and capacity building in order to help them be effective when they step into that role.
In our school system, I would say yes, the best and brightest in the classroom and maybe those great academic coaches approach the principalship and assistant principalship very cautiously, simply because of the demand of the work that they see. And they love teaching and love being with kids. Working with adults and leading teams of adults is very different than teaching a child. And leading a group of adults in the strategic planning process and to move that plan forward is very different than carrying out your lesson plan in your classroom. So yes, they approach it differently because the work is different, and as a result, the accountability and pressure is different too.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's give the panel a round of applause. We've covered a lot this morning, and we'll try to really summarize as we begin the afternoon session, but our lunch is here. And if we could be back in here at 20 minutes to 1, that would give us about 35 minutes to eat. Hopefully that'll be enough. If not, we bring you food. Well, we'll start. You continue to eat. Before we break, let me see if there's a last question. Okay, let's have lunch.
Mr. Wilbanks, can I just do a little housekeeping about lunch?
Yes.
There should be plenty out there for everybody in this room, but if you'll let the panel members go first, and then the rest of you should have lunches out there. The choices are sandwich box lunches, and there are 4 different types out there you can choose. There are drinks out there also. We failed to tell you, for those of you who are not familiar with this building, if you need to find the restroom, go out the door to the hallway and down past the elevator banks, and they're down on that end, other end of the building down there. So if you need any help, I'll be glad to show you.
Thank you, all. Very good. Let's eat.
The other side of the building. I use my ID.
You didn't have any trouble with this?
No, I didn't. They got green.
Scott's on our commission. Once a month, make sure
That's right.
I had to throw everything on the shelf and then spread eagles across the backside of the building.
That's exactly right.
We get it sent out to them, so we'll email it to you today. And when you have it, you just make the change to work. Or whatever way you want to do it, that would be fastest way. I'm assuming we didn't send them an email copy of this.
No, sir, we did not, but we could.
But again, the purpose of sending it to you is to get you input. And let's say if we don't get input back by Wednesday, we'll probably send it first, okay? All right.
Question around this, just two things I noticed. First of all, on questions 5 and 6, does your district currently provide leader preparation, professional development to aspiring leaders? And the answer is probably yes. Give it a yes or no question, it's something. My question is on 5 and 6, would it be better to say on a scale of 1 to 10, what level of preparation do you believe you give to your leaders? You know, that way they can say, well, I do it, but we're kind of a 2 or 3, or I do it, or we're a 6 or 7. And there's a big difference there. I think everybody would probably say yes, but I don't know if that tells us that much.
Good, very good point. That's the type of thing that we would like to have. I don't want to take a minute. So you still ask that question, then say what level, what penetration.
To your satisfaction. And then maybe define Leader Academy. I mean, Leader Academy can mean different things. If you define Academy to train head principals to do A, B, C, and D, they know what exactly it is we're talking about. That might be helpful.
Good. Okay. All right, we'll email it to you, and you can have a chance to look it over, and then give us back any other comments. That was a good suggestion. Okay. All right. Moving on. At the last meeting, Representative Stovall asked a very pertinent question about what the parent will do. And obviously, we don't have time nor the money to survey all the parents. So we sort of did what we told you we were going to do this time. We were not going to reinvent the wheel or do something over. There were several surveys that have been conducted, reputable surveys, by organizations that get at that kind of question. So I've asked Frances Davis if she would to talk to us about that. Frances, while Glenn's giving this out, let me just say that Dr. Davis has been in education more than 2 years. About 32 years, I think, right, Dr. Davis? 32 years. And we really appreciate the work she does. And has always been somebody that was willing to step up and do some work. We need it done and do it in a timely manner. Dr. Davis, tell us what you got.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Wilbanks, members of the committee, I am delighted today to share just a little bit of information. Dr. Peppel has passed out a handout, so I won't go through and read line by line for you there, but I do want to do some highlights here on some research that we have had an opportunity to look at. The first research there is that was done by the Gallup organization, and basically some of the questions that came out of the superintendent's panel this morning is some of the same information there that Gallup compared recent poll in 2016 back to a poll in 2014. and agreed with our superintendents on the panel today that says, yes, we are less likely today to say that we are highly effective in the selecting and the recruiting and the development of a talent pipeline. They're saying that it is slightly more difficult today to do that process. Also, in that same poll, Gallup determined that there were some key levers that our district leaders and our school-based leaders need to use in order to engage parents in activities and into the life of children in school. First, they wanted the principal to treat them with respect. Secondly, they want these principals to be able to create a trusting environment that parents don't fear coming into. They want them to respond to community concerns. And they want them to be enthusiastic about the future. And basically all that means is the parents are saying in this poll that they wanted leaders to give them hope about the future and the success of their children going through the process of K-12 education and coming out and being great citizens in today's society. Also, most of us are familiar with the PDK poll that comes out every year that talks about the public attitudes towards school. And one thing that really struck home in this one and the last several ones is that thing that they want their children prepared for life. And this really cuts across your affluent communities, your metro, your urban, your poor, your at-risk neighborhoods. All those parents really want is the same thing. They want their children prepared for life. At the very bottom there are some other little snippets there that have come from the Wallace Foundation, the RAND Corporation, and many of our policy study associates. And those little bullets basically say that parents want principals that are going to keep them informed. They want them to be able to communicate with them and tell them what's going on in their schools. They don't like to hear that on the street, through the news media. They want effective communicators and the leaders at their school. And they want them to provide this information in a very timely fashion. They also want to be able to partner with the principals of our schools, assistant principals of our schools. They want to be able to partner with these leaders and work together in rearing their children. When Superintendent Will Banks came on in Gwinnett in 1996, his concern then was, of course, how do we go about selecting and screening and that whole process of selecting a principal for our schools. And shortly after he came aboard, he really focused more on what the community wanted to see in a principal in their school. He wanted those questions answered. What do parents want to see in a principal? What do PTA officers want to see? And so from that, we were looking at how do we glean that information so that when we started in the process of selecting and screening and interviewing, that we would factor in those pieces that have come from the people that we're actually serving, and those children are coming in the communities those children were coming from. And so we instituted a process called our superintendent community school meeting. And just on the average, Gwinnett County hires about 11 to 12 principals a year. And so we're talking somewhere now in his tenure, somewhere close to 265, 70 principals over a period of years. And we found that one of the most effective ways to get that information was to go where our parents were, to go in the community. So when a school has a vacancy, the first thing that we do, of course, is announce the vacancy. And then we conduct a meeting in that school for the purpose of hearing what that community at large wants in that next principal for that school. That is the superintendent's meeting. So the superintendent meets with those people in the community. They are parents of the school. They are PTA officers, PTA members. They are local school council members. They are our clergy, pastors from churches across the community that feed into that school, our business partners for that school, as well as business people in the community. Staff members from that school, teachers from that school, elected officials come to those meetings, mayors of the community, city councilmen, commissioner. We've even had state representatives to attend those superintendent's community meetings. And they last for about an hour, and it's him and the community. Well, in the rear, there are 4 of us. As the Associate Superintendent of Human Resources, I was there. Bernie Kirkland, our Chief of Staff. The principal supervisor for that school is there. And the person who supervised that person is in the back. And we're taking copious notes about what is coming from this group. And usually it's anywhere from 30 to 40 to 45 people that assemble in that school to tell the superintendent what they want to see in that next principal. Now, following my last comment, I'm going to read you some of the excerpts that they sent in. We also placed a survey online for that school principal. So if Smith Elementary is seeking a principal, the survey that we put online on that school website, and for those who don't have access, we print hard copies that can even be picked up in human resources or at the local school. And the local school could mail them if that person called and say, mail me a survey. All of those surveys are sent back into human resources, so they're really totally anonymous for the people within the school, and we compile the data. And so not only do they have a checklist that they can check, but they also have an opportunity to write comments on the survey about what they want to see in the next principal of that school. And usually we pick up to somewhere 200, 250 surveys come back in. Now, anybody in that community can go online to that school, whether you are a parent or you don't even have children in that school, and you can respond to that survey. We compile the information from both feedbacks, from the feedback of the superintendent parent community meeting. We take notes and we compile that data, and then we take the data that's compiled in the survey, and we use this data prior to interviewing and prior to the selection of a principal for that particular school. Just to give you some comments, a copy, this isn't open, this is in 2008, but I want to refer you back to the handout. The things that you see on the handout at the very bottom are the things that we have continuously see pop up on this list of things that list of people that I shared with you earlier want to see in a principal. That first thing there is visibility. They want a person that's highly visible. They want to see you on the bus line. They want to see you at the football games. They want to see this principal at the orchestra. They want to see him at career night. They want to see you at Kroger's. I mean, they want to know that you have an investment in that school. They want an effective communicator. They want someone who's going to talk their language. They want someone who's going to be accessible, and they want news coming out of your school coming from that principal. So they want leaders who are highly effective in communicating both written and orally. They also want a person who can make connections. They want a person who can make a connection with them as a parent. They want a person who can see and understand their role as a community leader or person in the faith-based community, regardless of which, from Baptist all the way down to wherever you like to take that, a wide range of faith-based people in the community. They want to know that you can relate to them. They want a person who can build strong relationships.
And you build those relationships before you need the relationship. So they want someone who's going to come into that school and immediately begin to work that entire school community to build those strong relationships. They also want someone who has an instructional focus. They want kids that are academically challenged, and they want their kids to be successful. But they also want someone who can handle a crisis. They want someone, if a crisis occurs at that school, they want to know that their kids are safe. They want to know that the bus lane is smooth. They want to know that lunches are being served on time. They want to know that after-school activities are managed appropriately. The leader of that school, they want to make sure that they have trust, that there's trust that's being built, and that these principals can demonstrate a high level of trust and integrity. Let me share with you what some of our parents have said. This person should be fair and impartial and has the best interests of students, school, and community at heart. This person will hopefully be able to instill a we-ness among the staff, parents, and students. After being involved in Smith High School for close to 10 years, I feel that it is important to select a principal that is committed to the students as well as the community. Smith High School has many traditions and encompasses not only the student, but the alumni and parents as well. Also, because of the diverse population of Smith High School, the principal must be able to work with many situations that require diplomacy and tact. The goal is to provide a good education and not at the expense of a particular group. We must continue to embrace our diversity and offer the best education possible to all students. We need someone who is genuinely, enthusiastically willing to put in the time and effort to make our school great. One parent, make our school great so that I, as a parent, am proud of my children's school, and they are proud too. A new principal will need to be one who has great people skills and is adept at balancing the needs of all students, parents, and staff while keeping the school focused. Teaching and learning is primary goal. Educating our children by hiring the most gifted and competent education staff. And finally, the number one skill has got to be leadership. An effective leader will have to select the right people to assist them with the big, big task of educating children. They are all important, but leadership has got to be number one. Chairman Wilbanks, that concludes our report for today. And I stand ready to answer any questions.
Thank you for that information. I guess, I don't know if it's a question for you or a question for the committee, is that with all of that information, which is wonderful, then how do you go about with that selection process? And then how do you ensure on the front end when we're talking about with our academy, making sure that all that's included in the training that's going to be given for those principals that come through the academy? Because I think some of it is some things that I guess you can be taught, and others is a part of personality. And so how are you able to distinguish, and how you have been able to distinguish that personality part and the other part that can actually be taught?
Well, you start first with your selection process. Early this morning we heard that about a number of people do aspire to be principals, but everybody who aspires to be a principal cannot be successful in that position. So your selection process has to be tight. You have to have a process to select the potential talent of people who can be highly functional in that position. Following your selection process, then you have to have a program. You have to have an academy, you have to have a curriculum in whichever program you choose that's going to zero in on these characteristics that we know not only parents and community say, but we know as educators and as community leaders that effective principals have. Your curriculum has got to be able to build that, even down to the emotional intelligence that the superintendent was talking about earlier. There are tools and instruments out there to gauge a person's ability to be effective in that arena. And so with that, you have all of your live processes where people get the information, get the curriculum and the instruction, and then they move into the field to begin to practice that. And they have mentors that work with them even after they get the job. You're right, there's some of this that you just cannot teach, but a large portion of it is that you can help develop people who have the potential to be a school leader. And at some point there, Representative, you have to have a process within that process to deselect. There are people, you know, all my life I wanted to be a ballerina. And at some point, somebody had to deselect me because I just couldn't do it. And so at some point, you know, as tough as that deselection process is, you have to make that decision, which is in the best interest of the kids for long term. So it's not a silver bullet answer for you, but you've got to have a program that addresses most of these needs. Yes, sir.
Yes.
I'm just trying to get on the ballerina part. And I like the fact that you said we have to deselect. 90% of the time, maybe 80% of the time, we do choose the right people to serve in the right capacities. But don't let a bad person stay there too long. And this is what happens in a lot of the schools. We recycle them or we move them to some place. Well, I don't think, you know, it's better for them over here, we'll put them over there, and the children suffer. So, I mean, I don't know if that's just a comment and not something for the committee to look at, but as a whole, I've seen it done, especially in the district that I serve in.
Most of our components that come underneath the Quality Plus Leadership Academy, there is a deselection process in the academy prior to being selected to be a principal. And so you can see sometimes in that training process that a person may not be a good fit for a principal. And so you can deselect before they even get on the job. And then when Superintendent Wilbanks came in 96, he started to talk to us about the dance of the limits. And of course we didn't hear him when he first started talking. But shortly after that, we all heard, every leader in the district understood the dance of the limits. And simply what this meant, if we had a principal in Smith High School that was not performing well in Smith High School, that person was not placed in our central office, nor was that person placed at Jones High School. That person was removed after a lot of staff development, after a lot of district level support, after a lot of support that came from mentors and coaches. That person was either terminated or moved back to a position where they came from, where they had great success.
In the rural areas, you find a lot of, what do I want to say, excuses. They say, well, we can't find anybody else, or this, and that's the largest, the biggest excuse. And in a lot of instances, that's not true. Dr. Turner is living proof. She's a metro transplant to a very rural area. It's just that we don't trust outsiders as much in the rural areas as we should, and we don't give them a chance. So, you know, that's just additional talk.
I would just briefly ask you that, to the extent you're taking any feedback from the committee on those criteria, I think a principal that has the right spirit of the place, you know, the spirit that every individual child really matters. You know, if I've said before, they were going to pave a highway through one of my constituents' backyards, and I got involved. So, you know, if one person doesn't matter, then no one really matters. And I just think as we develop these criteria, what the principal looks like, what academy teaches to, in high schools of 22, 2,300 kids, 3,000 kids, I think principals, there's so many demands on them. If they ever lose sight of the one kid who's maybe reached too far, maybe they're taking a pre-calculus class and they shouldn't have taken it so early, a way to work with them to kind of get them through that. I just think there's got to be that intangible that we can't lose sight of. There's so many kids we're trying to educate. It's having the finesse and the soft hand, not struggling kids, but it's just that the 80% of the kids who are the average, not the top ones, we manage the top pretty well, we manage the bottom pretty well. But the kids in the middle, I think sometimes get lost, and to the extent we can have a circumstance where those parents and principals are acclimatized to return phone calls from moms and to not manage by the numbers. I just think that is our challenge. And I think as schools have gotten bigger, it's become more and more difficult for these principals. We're managing all the alligators to try to maintain that touch.
Representative, I agree wholeheartedly. You've got to have a person who has the passion for the work. And we teach this in our academies. It is essential that the principal understands that they cannot be the person who does everything in that school. You speaking of a high school, I can think of one of our high schools that has right at 4,000 students, and it's impossible for that one principal to manage the entire instructional program along, the operational side along. That's why it's so critical that we develop the assistant principals that support that principal, and you have a team of leaders that principal is able to work and build relationships on that team. So he or she is still the principal, but he or she has a supporting cast there to help them make sure those phone calls are returned, to make sure that when the phone rings, it doesn't go over to a voicemail, that someone live still picks that phone up and respond back to parents, their emails. I think we work really, really hard at that. Can we improve that? Yes. But it has to be with the development of that supporting cast. Someone mentioned earlier today that the assistant principal position is kind of a forgotten position. You have to make sure that the assistant principals in that school are all aligned and that they are all contributing members of that supporting cast to support that principal in order to run a high school with 4,000 kids in it. I agree.
Okay, one of the reasons for putting this on the agenda was to just remind us, first of all, schools belong to people. They wouldn't call common schools for no reason. They belong to the people. And no matter how we go about training or operating schools, we can't ever forget that. But I think it's just not enough to assume that's going to happen. You've got to build some strategies and some avenues to get that improvement. And then once you get it, you're going to get some input that you probably couldn't possibly do. Be walking on water or jumping out buildings and running bound, but you get information that really you can take to not just personalize it to the students and to the community, but to really help you focus on what you mission. We give this feedback to whoever's going to be that person. We give it to them. Matter of fact, it's worth more to them than anybody else. It's not going to do me much good other than just have some idea that if that was a principal that was invited to lead, well, yeah, we were correct. Or if that's a great principal, we need more of that. We just do that, more of that. But at the same time, I think what it says to us, particularly in the context of training, you can't forget how your principal operates, both internally and externally. And I'm over this thing, both extrovert and introvert. if you're an extrovert, just talk when you have to talk. You know, that's fine. When you're supposed to talk, talk. If you're an extrovert, may have got those backwards. If you're an introvert, talk when you need to. If you're an extrovert, maybe you need to shut up talking sometimes. And then if you do that, you'll be okay. So I think what it is really helping us remember that the schools are owned, they're owned by people. And the kids that come to those schools, the kids that come to your school, are the kids you're supposed to teach. There's not another set coming next week. The ones you have are the ones you got. So you've got to develop your instructional program for those particular kids. And we made a call, the Secretary of Defense made the statement that you got to go to war with the army you got. Well, you got to teach your students with the staff you got. So what you got to do is make sure that you are putting that into the mix of leading and operating that school. Make sure that, number one, there's quality and effective instruction going on in every single classroom, not just one. And where it isn't, then that's where they really got to focus attention, whether it's the principal himself or on the assistant principal or grade level chair, or really do it with the teachers, really forming a team to get done what needs to be done. This is when you really get the feel for what a community is like, and it's probably, and I apologize for bringing something personal with you. This is one of the best things I've ever done to get the feel for the community. I made you say I've been to Francis.
264.
Even the 264 of these meetings, that's a lot of time. I hear stuff at these meetings I wouldn't hear anymore. And I know we were at a meeting this past summer, a very diverse school, a very challenged school. And all the people that we had in the pool that we were screening from, we hadn't yet started selecting that person to go to that school. But I knew who the pool was, who was in the pool. And there was a retired State Farm agent, African-American gentleman. And about halfway through the meeting, he raised his hand and he said, Mr. Wilbanks, I want you to get a good look at me, and I want to tell you I'm a rock star. And I didn't really know where he was going with it, but he said, I retired, I played golf about 3 weeks, and got so tired of playing golf. I said, I gotta find something else to do. So I bet that school could use my help. So he goes up to the school and intended to work 1 day a week. He said, I'm here sometimes 5 days a week, and I'm trying to cut back to 3 of 84, but I do need 1 day to play golf. But I said, well, why don't you just tell him you gotta do that? He said, look, he said, can you assure me that we'll be able to get, he said, first of all, I don't want to get into quotas or whatever, but can you assure me that we'll get an African-American person on the leadership? And, you know, you think what you want to about that, but what he was really saying, I'm a role model. And the school's full of Caucasian, primarily Caucasian ladies, and they need a role model. So, Francis, I said, you know, we've never done this before, but we're going to do it this time when we introduce that. We don't have an African American that's ready to be a principal in that school. I don't know, what, 15 so Caucasians. But I said, we do have some African Americans as assistants, very good assistants. So you introduce the assistant principal. along with the principal of that school. And it was a huge hit. And you know, you don't do this stuff for hits, but I got a message back, and all it said, "Tell Mr. Wilbanks thank you." Well, I'm saying that I would, if I had not been at that meeting, I don't believe that would have happened. So it makes it more personal, I think, than you can do, and I'm not suggesting that everybody do that as a question. But I get more from that, and I think it's really helped the district. We make sure that we give whoever goes there is right. And I said, at least on this day, those people, that's how they think. And I will take it. Anyway, so much for that. Any other comments or questions? I didn't mean to take that much time on that issue. I think it says, see, you can build your academy around some of the things that all the research says people do. And they do in the principle of business. Now, that's different things to the parents. That's the car ride around. That's in the hallways, the school. They want to be able to, if they call the principal from the front, you can't see everybody, but at least be responsive to what this is how you make it more realistic for the community that you're in, to serve the community that you're in. And whether you're in a large district or small district, each community has something unique about it that will make a difference in people's support of that school. And as we heard this morning, unless you can bring some community input into these schools, I don't know that we'll ever get them performing at the level that you got to have some learning. How you get that, there's probably a lot of different ways. Okay. Let's move on. The next item is the CSSO report. Dr. Pepper.
Thank you, Chairman Will Banks. Committee members received in the email providing detail about this particular meeting, a publication. And I hope you've had an opportunity to open that publication, because I believe this to be one of the most relevant publications related to the work and the deliberations of this joint study committee. The publication I'm talking about is a September 2017 publication written by Policy Studies Associates out of Washington, D.C., and it was prepared for the Council of Chief State School Officers. So what I want to do is ask you to just think for a minute and reflect. I see Senator Tippins, you pulled out your copy of that report. I'm going to ask you to just think about that for a moment, and I'm going to circulate and give you a summary of that report. And then perhaps answer the question, why didn't you give me the summary first? So to answer the question, why didn't I give you the summary first or include it? And my response to that is I felt the report from Policy Studies Associates summarizing what is going on, at least in parts of the United States, was extremely important information because for the first time in my memory, we have a number of states who are all focused on school leadership in ways that I haven't seen in my career. Part of that perhaps is because of some of the emphasis or the focus on Every Student Succeeds Act. Perhaps part of that may be the opportunity to use some federal grant monies that otherwise in previous years was not available. But for whatever reason, I'd like to think that we see more effort across our states because more people have arrived at the place where I think you are. And where I think you are is that understanding that without leadership, all of our efforts to turn around those low-performing schools may be for naught, without focusing on the leverage of leadership. So again, this report really illustrates that a lot of other folks are in, I think, very similar positions to you as members of this joint study committee. So specifically, what I'd like to do is to point out a couple of the big takeaways. And if you have the full report, you'll see those on page 1. If you have just the summary that I just handed out, you'll see those takeaways there. So the big one and the first one I think appropriately listed is that the focus on leadership and the focus on professional development, the focus on the preparation of future leaders is a state priority and a really important priority. The second one I think is one that is often overlooked, and that is that those who supervise principals are critical not only to the success of the principal, but perhaps also critical to the success of the school. So in many cases in smaller school districts, we know that that is an associate superintendent, a deputy superintendent, an assistant superintendent for schools. And in small school districts, we know it's the superintendent. So increasing the skill, the know-how, and perhaps helping improve some of the talent perhaps that those principal supervisors have can do one of two things: either contribute to the success of the principal or perhaps distract or become a hindrance to the success of the principal. So more focus on principal supervision. The third takeaway is that school improvement is not an isolated effort. That school improvement should be taken in the overall context of how we're thinking about leaders. How are we thinking about where the future leaders will come from? And rather than, again, as I said to you before, rather than crossing our fingers and hoping they show up at the right time, Senator Sims, perhaps we should think about expanding and perhaps changing our mindset about that and being very proactive in our growth. So with that being said, again, I consider this to be a really, really important work. Mr. Wilbanks, he and I had the opportunity to look at this work in depth, and again, I recommend it. On page 3 of the full report, I want to highlight a couple of things here, because what I'm going to highlight we will have a definite link to in your next meeting. On page 3, several states are mentioned as states that have made progress on principal support and professional development. Noteworthy is Missouri. Next month, we'll have the pleasure of hearing from the Associate Commission from Missouri. It's interesting to note that Wisconsin and Georgia are identified here as having developed online training modules that incorporate videos.
you'll notice a paragraph down that Tennessee is mentioned and referenced. Again, next month we'll have the pleasure of hearing from the Associate Commissioner from Tennessee, the person who's been very engaged in the statewide leadership academy there. And then the third item is Kentucky, the last paragraph. Again, we're going to have the pleasure, Senator Tippins, of hearing someone from the great state of Kentucky who's worked really hard on their statewide leadership academy. So again, page 5, I think, in this report is probably as concise and succinct of a summary of the evidence on school leadership. You know, we shared a lot of information with you in the first meeting of this committee. But again, this is, I think, constructed well. And again, if you ever wanted a one-pager or, you know, some kind of cue card, this would be the one I would use because it's very clear and very straightforward. Finally, notice that throughout the report, that as you move over several pages, if you'll look at page 11, you'll see a map of the United States. And Georgia is included, and we get credit with the color of our state here because it says that we have participated in principal evaluation action groups and that we have participated in principal professional learning action groups. I'm not sure I'm qualified to speak on what that means, but we got credit for it. You know, so anytime you get credit on a U.S. map, I guess that's supposed to be good, right? Also on page A2, it's interesting to note in these major domains of principal focused work that the state of Georgia gets quite a bit of credit, or at least we get referenced, or at least there's a notation that Georgia has done some of this. So again, bring that to your attention. Now, finally, last but not least, what you see is an alphabetic one page. So if you want to know what's going on in Arkansas, you'll get an update on that. Likewise, if you'll move over to Georgia, Georgia's on page A10. Here's a report on what we're doing in Georgia. Again, I'm not qualified to speak to this information. More than likely, this information was provided by the Georgia Department of Education. Dr. McGiddy, I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but most likely someone in our Georgia Department of Education was interviewed, most likely, by somebody on the Policy Studies Associate. So again, I encourage you to look at that, but I also encourage you to look at the states of Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Delaware. So again, a nice one-page summary of that. Are there any questions about this summary report and the information that it contains, and perhaps how some of the information here may help us, may help you as a committee? In some ways, I think this underscores and reinforces what we said at your last meeting, is that probably little or no need to do additional research on the qualities of effective school leaders. That's been done for us and completed, and it's very clear and very specific. Again, I was very, very pleased with the timing of this report. It could not have come at a more opportune time for this joint study. Mr. Wilbanks, that concludes my report on the CCSSO report.
Okay. We're moving now on the agenda to item 10, the Georgia Leadership Academy. I think the charge from the governor was for providing recommendations for a state leadership academy. In addition, whatever the number is, I don't know, my friend will maybe this time, whether it's 155 or 125, whatever that number, both performance to provide priority for addressing leadership issues at those schools. And what I want to do is just to teach you what could be considered a conceptual model for state leadership. I'm not going to discuss it today. I just want to look at it, offer any suggestions that you have, and we'll discuss that. Beginning next week, because as you know, February, would be good. It's February 1st, December 1st. We're supposed to have a presentation together, and as I told you the first meeting, we intend for us to do that, and I think we can. But what I want us to do is to begin thinking about a leadership academy and which way, how many different components, how would we structure some things to really address, number one, priority needs of the state. And I'll remind us all again, there are 91 school districts that have 3,500 of their students. Most of those districts, a lot of those are very good districts. However, most of them do not have the capacity to provide leadership. So that alone is a need. But at the same time, and who's got the copy of that? I got it. Okay, can you get that passed out? Again, you will be adding something to it if you said this is a proposed model. I'm just saying this is an example of what a proposed model would be, and particularly one for discussion purposes, okay? That will direct some of our discussion next week, and I did highlight a couple of boxes that would show what a priority would be of what we're talking about doing. And when we hear from the state directors and the state people, Tennessee being one of them, what are they doing? This will give us an idea of what we might want to focus on as well. Maybe just let you take a look at that and ask any questions, and hopefully the questions will be around just understanding what's there, not anything about it. This is what's there.
What's the, as you talk about this, is this viewed as a sort of a check-in once a month over time? Is this viewed as a more of a resident thing for a period of a week or some amount of time over the summer? I mean, what is, if we could define what the perfect circumstance would be, what do you have in mind in that? What do you think's the body of that?
A very good question, and we'll get into a lot more of that next week. But it could take on many forms. It could take, summertime is a time when you could bring people together for a week or part of the week, and maybe a week at two different times. That way they're not missing school. Not to say they don't have things to do. And then you could meet, follow up with a monthly meeting or something later on, and you could even do it by region. You might do the, let's just say a week-long meeting. You may do that in a central location where you have all your resources. And then you might then go out because I think we know if you really you want to do regional clusters, for example, if we work to address the low performance students, we probably know that, and I'm just throwing out some numbers here to give this let me be wrong for the day, it doesn't matter. Let's say 35–40% of them are probably in metro area. So you certainly got critical mass there. And then in southeast Georgia area, no district has that many, because those are small districts, but at least that's where it's in the southeast part, and then maybe the central eastern side of the state. Concentration, so, or you could maybe do meeting in regions, certain months. You could maybe have another central meeting 2 or 3 times a year. Cut down. There are all kinds of operational schedules and entrances that you can make. Normally, I think most leadership academies probably go for a year. And then that could be followed up in the next year. Coaches and then what they learn, just put into practice. And was it making a difference? So that's just one, maybe a variety of things that we do. I think we all know that we're probably not going to have the luxury of having people take a year sabbatical and then be involved in classes or doing anything somewhere else. Very costly. And we don't even think that explaining is maybe the best way. But certainly, we do need to address some of the issues that really get down to helping people. How do you develop that instructional focus for the student? And how do you deal with the student you have? And when I indicated that the kids that come to the school today, that's going to be the kids that will be there all year, basically. So those are the kids that we've got to design the instructional program around. We got to provide the staff development for them to really make a difference. And I think those are some of the things that would vary what a schedule might be. And quite frankly, you might even look to, there are some generic things in leadership. Like, what is leadership? What does leadership look like? And we all know that obviously leaders set direction. Leaders create and help maintain commitment to every staff. Leaders address issues and problems. That's what leadership looks like in work. Plus many other things. What do you really do to really make sure that that student has an instructional focus from the principal to the classroom level? And quite frankly, everybody in the school, including the custodians, anybody that's in that school, their responsibility is making sure that those youngsters attend that school are being successful. I can attend it even reaches out to the bus drivers. Because actually, the bus driver is the first person employed by the school district that students see every day. And usually they're the last student. And there's a big difference. Get your rear end on the bus and shut up. Saying good morning. Probably puts a kid in a little bit so that they make their contribution. I need to know about creating that environment that is welcoming, friendly, but one that's serious about getting the good done. Jeff, do you have any?
No, sir.
I used to work at a cattle auction in South Georgia, and we loved the days when there were a lot of gnats. Every time I loaded cattle. Yes, I
not, you all might be able to hear me without it. How's that? Ooh, that's way too low. Turn it up. You can hear me, right? I appreciate this conceptual model greatly, and I think it really helps us think about where the points are in a person's career at which they need the training to take that next step. And what I would, if I may, Chairman Wilbanks, call to the attention of the members of the committee is that second box from the left, that second line, core programs for principal pipeline preparation and development, aspiring assistant principal program and an aspiring principal program. I see those as two places where the formal preparation programs that lead to certification kind of fit nicely, especially now with the changes that we've made where we have a two-tiered process for leader preparation, the first tier being for assistant principals, and then that second tier being specifically for building leaders and district level leaders who supervise principals. And the fact that that second tier is heavily focused on the job embedded learning, where that person has to be in a leadership role and be working in a school or in a situation where they are leading, they have the opportunity to do some of the things that we heard from the committee, panel members earlier, learn on the job, practice in real situations, do relevant work that's connected to their learning. And so I think it's going to be very important for us to recognize how those formal preparation programs fit into this model and the importance of the partnerships that those preparation program providers have with the P-12 schools. And those partnerships are critical in identifying the people who have the right dispositions, who have the potential to get into these programs. And then also the partnerships play a critical role in providing that coaching and that mentoring while those candidates are on the job learning. So I say that more as a point of information for us to think about those connections, those links. The RESAs have, 3 of our RESAs now have alternative route leadership preparation programs. Where do they fit in? And I think we've got a lot of potential resources out there that fit in different places in this model.
I would say, taking off on what she said, I think about when you have formal structured leadership programs. The military, I'll take the Army as an example, they have the non-commissioned officer education programs. Before you become a bunk sergeant and lead troops, you go through a basic course, and then there's a next course, and then there's an advanced course. There's 3 levels, and they're teaching people the core skills to take the next job and make sure there's no skill gap. But they're also teaching skills 1 and 2 levels above. And here's the important, here I think is the key, is you're learning as a E5 surgeon who might be leading 5 to 10 soldiers. They make sure you're ready to do that. They're also teaching you to lead 30 and 100 soldiers. Because as you go through that job and you go to your next course, in this case, I guess by translation, things you learn as assistant principal, they make sure you know everything you would need to know, but also things you need to know as a building leader and perhaps an area superintendent, because you're going to go through your development as an assistant principal. Then when you take your course to get ready to be a head principal, if you've learned some things about being a head principal in your first class, that academic exposure allows your 3 or 4 or 5 years as assistant principal to have ideas in your mind, frameworks to kind of hang experiences onto. So that when you're a principal, you would have had 4 years of preparation to be a head principal, because those head principal ideas were exposed to you in your first course. So it really makes the learningfulness of your experience count for more, because you've had exposure to those things. That's what I see in this, is if you have an assistant principal course, a principal course, and maybe exposing people even beyond what they need for their next job, because they're able to, in those 5 years, make even more value. That's how the Army does it. And I know the military, over the course of a couple of generations, has been focused on that. So that's not an unknown structure. I just, we commend that kind of approach. And We're not making this up, so.
Okay, the remaining time, Lynn, do you have that? Okay.
So, one additional handout that we haven't talked about that was included in your folder when you arrived is a compilation. Dr. McGivney, we want to thank you for initiating this document. And it's a really, really good compilation because we talk about Reese's, we talk about Justin. You did a nice job of illustrating perhaps not only similarities but some of the differences. What this document does is capture what the Reese's reported that they are doing. So it's a self-reported, is that fair to say, Gary? Self-reported data. But again, using your map, as you want to map out, and as you read through some of this, read through it in terms of, again, what's being applied, who are they serving, and perhaps what evidence do we see of its impact. The second thing, Mr. Wilbanks, that I had, and this will prepare us for the closing today, is I wanted to share a little more specific information about at least one segment of our next meeting, and sharing with you information about the panelists who will be with us, traveling to be with us. That's all I have.
While that's being passed around, are there any things, any committee member, any comments, questions? Our next meeting is Tuesday, October 17th, 2023. Here this week. Any comments, questions?
Mr. Wilbanks, I'd like to say how much I appreciated the superintendent's comments specifically, because I think that one of the challenges of the academy is being able to produce leaders that are able to operate across the state, and there's such diverse situations in the state. And so the superintendent's input, I think, is so important because it really, I think, feeds some of what we're going to need to do for sustainability and scalability of the program. That was very, very helpful for me today.
Any other comments, questions? Anything you'd like to see that's not being done for the next meeting? We're going to focus on the state leadership academy. We'll have a bit of discussion around what should Georgia's all right. If there are no comments, I think we've covered everything we needed to cover. I would say that on the October meeting, when we have 4 state officials that have leadership, statewide leadership academies that will be here presenting to us. And hopefully we will have some feedback on the principals survey that we sent out. And we will email you the survey that we sent out. Comments sometime this afternoon. All right, very good. Thank you very much.
You make a good preacher. Get yourself by 12 o'clock.